Hello, this is Matt Wilhelm from Yellowstone Fly Fishing School in Livingston, Montana, and today I'm going to tie for you one of my favorite flies. It's a gray drake cripple pattern that was named by my friend Chuck as the Happy Meal. So we're going to tie the Happy Meal gray drake cripple today, and it's one of my favorite flies. We get these drake patterns or these drake emergences in the summer in our mountain streams. Usually during, from anytime from 11 o'clock in the morning until 1, 2, even 3 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on the weather. The hatches usually happen in middle of July through maybe the first part of August. This will be a gray drake pattern, but you can alter the materials and colors and the hook size to do a PMD or a blue-winged olive or a green drake or any type of mayfly pattern. This one in particular will be of the gray drake variety. For the hook today, we're going to use a size 12 standard dry fly hook. For the wing, we'll be using some elk hair. For the body, we'll be using a gray goose biot, which is this side of the goose feather. For the thorax, a little bit of gray dubbing. And for the hackle, we'll be using a gray hackle. All right. So, first thing we have to do is we'll put a thread base down the hook, cover the hook with thread. Then I'm going to come back up to the front to tie on my wing, made out of elk hair. Now, this wing, when a good rule of thumb, like I've mentioned in the other videos, is whenever you work with elk hair or deer hair, is to select a chunk of hair that is about the gap of the hook when it's relaxed in your fingers. I'm going to take off just a little bit of this elk hair, make it a little bit more sparse. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to remove all of the underfur or duff that could be in here. If you leave that underfur in there, you want these butts to be nice and clean. No underfur, because that underfur will or can sink the fly if it absorbs with water. I've got a couple of turned around hairs in here, so I'm going to remove those real quickly before I stack it in the hair stacker. There we go. All right, put it in my hair stacker, tips down, and tap it a few times. Even up those tips. Good, I didn't want that one anyway. There we go. So there's my hair, nice and even and stacked. And we're going to tie this in. This will be our wing, and it's going to hang off the front of the fly. So I'm going to tie this down a little bit less than that, I think. There we go. Tie this down so it hangs off the front of the hook, and then wrap backward a little bit, tie it down nice and tight so it doesn't fall out. And then I'm going to clip off these butts right here. All right, now I'm going to move the thread all the way to the rear of the hook for my tail. I get rid of a couple of these little butts that are sticking up. Oh, I neglected to mention a material, I'm sorry. For the tail, I'm going to use some gray Antron yarn. And so since this is an emerging mayfly pattern, and I'm only going to use about half of this. So I'm going to make it a little bit more sparse. I'm just going to kind of break that in half. Since this is an emerging insect, this Antron yarn will kind of imitate the trailing shuck that hangs off the back of the fly. So I'm going to take and tie this in off the back of the hook. Then I'm going to wrap forward again so I keep an even body diameter toward the thorax. Cut these off in the front and make this a little bit shorter in the back, about the size of the hook gap. So there's my trailing shuck. Now, for the body, what I'll use is a gray goose biot. And the biot half of the feather is the the stiff feather right here on the front. And I'm going to cut off one of these. Now, one important thing when you're working with a goose biot is that the goose biot has a kind of a convex side and it has kind of a concave side. You want to attach this feather by the tip so that the convex side faces you. I'll move my thread to the back, tie in the tip of this feather, and then move my thread up toward where the thorax will be. Now, I use rotating hackle pliers for this step. It's just easier to hold on to this little feather with these pliers. Clip it on the end, and we'll work this feather around the fly. And the reason why I put that convex side up is that it gives you a kind of a better look to the fly, I think. It gives it more of a segmented type look as you move forward. And we're going to wrap forward up to about the thorax area. We get one more. There we go. And now we're going to tie this off. Now this is a pretty brittle feather. You want to be careful with the pressure on your thread. You don't want to put too much pressure or you'll cut it. Some people, sometimes what I'll do as well is before I wrap this feather, I'll put a little bit of head cement on the hook and wrap over top of that head cement to make it a little bit more durable, if you'd like to do that. So there's the abdomen of the fly, the biot. Now we're going to put a little bit of dubbing on here. And this is a dubbing made out of real beaver fur. And I like to use real beaver or otter or muskrat for this because beaver, otter, and muskrat have water repellent properties in their fur. If you use rabbit fur for this, rabbit fur tends to absorb water and it'll look great with rabbit fur, but it might not be as buoyant as it would with a fur that's of one of those water-dwelling critters that I just mentioned. So beaver, muskrat, otter, something like that. So I'm going to make a thin dubbing layer on my thread, and this will be my thorax. Let that thread catch up. Wrap it forward. I'm going to go a little bit more. I'm going to make that thorax a little bit thicker. Nice thing about working with dubbing is you could always add a little bit more if you want. I'll make that thorax a little bit heavier. There, just a little bit more on there. Make it a little bit more pronounced. There we go. Now, next thing is my hackle. And when I tie in a hackle, as I've said in other videos, this is a little trick that Scott Sanchez showed me. He's an amazing fly tyer, lives down in Jackson, Wyoming. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little cut on each side of the vein just to leave some little tiny stubs on there. Those little stubs are really going to the thread's really going to grab onto those, and you can use way fewer thread wraps than what you would normally use, and it won't fall out. And I'm not going to hackle this very heavy. I'm only going to use maybe I think that was 3 turns of the hackle, and I'll bring the thread up behind and tie that off. Then lift my wing up, bring the thread in front of the eye, create a head, and I'm going to tie 1/2 hitch just to hold it, and then I'll whip finish it after that. Again, you can tie this fly to imitate pale morning duns, to imitate green drakes, PMDs, whatever your heart desires. You just have to alter the size of the hook and the color of the materials. Got a little piece of antron sticking out there. And that's the gray drake cripple, or as my friend Chuck calls it, the Happy Meal. Great fly for our western rivers. Great fly tied in other patterns for other different mayflies. Sits nice and low in the water. If you want to, you can also trim the hackles on the bottom to make it lay even lower in the water, but I tend to leave them. Either way, it'll still work just great. But that's the gray drake cripple. Thank you very much.